Hello, I'm Howie Sheriff, and welcome finally to another show from You Call This Yoga. It's a miracle that we can even broadcast this show, and through the wisdom and generosity of Amnon, our studio producer, we're on the air after a slight delay. I got to sit here and experience restfulness in the midst of Amnon's intensity to get us reconnected to the internet, which is also ironic because our guest Marsha Danzig went to a location specifically to have better internet access. So it goes to show you don't ever know. Play it slow. Our show is about accessible yoga, which means bringing the elements of yoga into your life in whatever way is manageable for you. We bring our guests in from around the country, locally, and sometimes from out of the country if possible. Thanks, Diane. And share their pearls of wisdom and perspectives about accessible yoga and their journey as to how they've gotten to be deeply entrenched in this mission. Today's guest is Marsha Therese Danzig, who I had the privilege of meeting at the Accessible Yoga Conference last May in New York. Big shout out to the Accessible Yoga Org. They have another convention, San Francisco, in the fall. With Marsha's program, Yoga for Amputees, I attended, how's that for sentence structure? I attended Marsha's Yoga for Amputees program because I was very curious about alignment and philosophy. And I believe Marsha will bring both to the table or chair in that one has to consider the adjustments one makes with loss, which is also what yoga is a practice that we're training to deal with. Another poor sentence. We're training with yoga to deal with whatever comes up or whatever we lose. So without further rambling by me, I'm going to bring Marsha onto the show and ask Marsha to greet us. She's at her office and she'll share some of her journey as to where her yoga practice was prior to and subsequent to her experience with loss. Good morning, Marsha.
Good morning, Howie. I'm glad to be here.
Please.
So do you want me to? Okay. So when I was a little girl, we had a book called the Guinness Book of World Records. You may remember, you could thumb through, and there were fascinating pictures of yogis. And I used to try to do all the poses, and there was also a gymnast. So I got pretty good at yoga without knowing that I was doing yoga. And I just kept practicing these poses until the age of 13 when my bone cancer came back. And I was given not a great chance to live. I had a Ewing sarcoma, which is still not all forms of cancer are bad, but this was a bad one. And so they amputated below my left knee. So for many years, I did not approach movement, even though I've been a dancer and a ballerina and all of those things. And when I was living in Los Angeles in my early 20s, a friend of mine and I went to Joshua Tree National Monument, and she had just started taking yoga. So we were walking out through the monument, and we were on these beautiful big rocks, and she said, "Would you like to try Salutation to the Sun?" So I did it once, and it was like I had known it all my life. So that started the path for me. And so for me, yoga has always been a spiritual and body experience. And it's helped me to stay embodied through a lot of other losses that long-term cancer can do to a person. Like my kidneys failed in my 30s. I got a kidney transplant and I've had some heart issues. So through all of it, this yoga practice has given me tremendous resilience. I think in a way that I didn't even know before. Now that research is coming in around what happens in the brain because of yoga practice, because of breathing, because of meditation, I know that many of the experiences I had would have been far worse, health-wise and mental-wise, if I hadn't had yoga practice as part of my long-time journey.
Did you have any sense earlier on that kidney failure could be a consequence in your life, or had that been a whole new issue?
Well, in my 20s, again, I went for a routine surgery for my left limb. I have a prosthetic knee and prosthetic leg for my left leg. And they apparently they couldn't do the surgery because my blood pressure was outrageously high, like 200 over 100 or something. And I didn't know why. So they did some tests and they said, your kidneys are not doing great, but you're fine right now and you do need to go see a nephrologist. So I went and he said, eventually your kidneys will probably fail. And I went, and I said, that will be when I'm old in my 40s. so, so it came a little sooner than that, but they really, and it's given me a really interesting perspective on organs and emotions and the energy of organs can still be there when the organ is not there. And I think, again, yoga is a big part of that. And then again, the same with the limb. It's the physical limb is not there, but the energy is there. Mm-hmm. So having that awareness of wholeness and a whole body helps me to see my body in a different way than maybe your typical person.
Right. If you had a picture of you that was without prosthesis as a visual image to a camera or a person, as opposed to your own internal sensing and perspective of your prana or your aura or just how you operate as a person of who you are. Is that a fair representation?
It is. Yeah. Yep.
Well, viewers and listeners, this is an interactive show, and hopefully our delay has kept you still on board. We have a phone number of 919-518-9773. We have Skype, Computers 2K Voice, or you can log in on the chat box on the Nissan Communications channel for You Call This Yoga. We're here with Marsha Danzig, who is an educator, an author, and inspiration for many as a yoga teacher of teachers, as well as for people who are dealing with loss of limb. Today's a special show because we have 4 pearls from Teresa, plus our Fun and Yum Good Health tip. So let's get threading with the first pearl from Marsha.
This is pearl number 1. Entering a Yoga for Amputees class and beginning. In an amputee yoga class, you want to make sure that everybody feels really comfortable. So rather than beginning right away with asana practice or pranayama, you want to be giving people a time to connect, to share, to chit-chat, and have general conversations so that they can relax into their environment. So that it's not all about the limb loss, it's about them as human beings. And then gradually begin to introduce the group to centering and gather everybody together. So a really simple way to do that is to just plop out the question to everybody in the group, where are you from and how are you doing today? And have people break up into partners or small groups rather than it being vulnerable and in a big group sharing how they're really feeling, but just in a small intimate kind of setting that's casual and humanized. Then begin your practice. Namaste.
Humanizing, that's a very interesting way to dress the yoga class. It's lovely because it can also seem that we self-humanize in class, which maybe is what people are seeking. So how do you negotiate that, Marsha?
I don't really understand the question of self-humanize. Can you explain
Okay.
a little more?
Sure, when you were saying in the Pearl about humanizing the class, and I thought that was a very interesting concept of making it more engaging. And sometimes people are coming to class to be into their own experience. So that could be an interesting perspective, that how can we negotiate that as teachers or even as a student? How do we message?
Right. So most of the time when I'm teaching amputees, it's support groups or conferences, workshops, clinics, things like that. So they're already in an environment where they're among fellow peers, we'll say. And part of the reason that they're there together as amputees is to validate who they are as a person. So that's the humanizing piece of it. So even if it means that you're going to go into these deeper practices, I can say, kind of over the board, most of the people that I meet that are coming to yoga are new to yoga as amputees, and they want to feel better. They want to get balance and stability. They want to feel strong again. They want to be able to walk again and do what they did before. But in order to get that, to bring in the yoga part, we need to be mindful of the fact that they're really trying to feel normal again.
Mm-hmm.
So humanizing it means that they're not, again, a patient or at a clinic or something like that, that they're in just an enjoyable, positive, supportive experience where they will become more embodied and more in tune to themselves, and in tune to their limb or however many limbs they've lost, to understand how to either, if they've been amputees a long time, to find new ways of being in their bodies, or if they're new to it, to explore what's possible. So
Mm-hmm.
that's why I talk about it that way.
Mm-hmm. And in your experience, when you were managing your prosthesis as a young adult and practicing yoga some, how were you feeling in the classes that you attended? And then in your development as a yoga teacher, how did that journey evolve?
I was very anxious and I felt extremely vulnerable. I felt like, even if it wasn't true, that I was going to be stared at. Um, I was also really worried about sliding because in the old days we didn't have yoga mats, we had yoga blankets, so, or the floor or towels. So it was slippery. So the blessing in that is that I learned how to stabilize my body and can now do yoga on a lot of different surfaces. So that's a big part of being an amputee, is learning how to navigate your surface. I also was a little bit cautious around some yoga teachers, just because I actually sought older yoga teachers in their 50s and 60s who have been doing yoga like 20, 30, 40 years, a long, long time, so that they were really could embrace me, not just my amputation, but also encourage me, and just had a lot of knowledge. So for me, that's what I did.
Mm-hmm. Teachers, here is a wonderful opportunity to learn from Marsha's experiences and perspectives. Marsha, what is the best way for anyone to reach you?
Well, they can go to the website, www.yogaforamputees.com. They can email at Marsha, Marj, at yogaforamputees.com. And we have a Facebook page where I post something inspirational almost daily about some incredible amputee doing some amazing thing.
Mm-hmm. Which an amputee can also be a metaphor for loss in whatever we're negotiating with that could throw our balance off or our self perspective. Loss can mean many things beyond the physical that could be disabling. So I invite anyone who's feeling some sense of loss to consider reaching out to Marsha at yogaforamputees.com, going to the website, yogaforamputees.com, and going to the Facebook page. I also saw on your website, which I thought was really wonderful, lots of inspiration, lots of ways that people can learn nuances of practice, which I'm all about and hopefully our audience is into, and that there's ways to be learning regularly from the website. Could you talk about the website a little more?
Yeah, so I actually have to say I did a lot of research on how to do a website that would make an impact. And I knew that I wanted to have a lot of free resources for people because I get emailed and questioned a lot, and I like to respond to everybody, but it's a little overwhelming sometimes. So I just thought, I'll put up what I can, and then really, uh, I think it's important to see amputees in action and to see what we're capable of. So that's why there are many videos up there,
Mm-hmm.
and there's always coming. So
Delightful. Teachers, whether you're full limbed or not, and the rest of the community, whether you're a yoga teacher or not, we invite you to reach out to Marsha. She has some great perspectives. She's also put a lot of these perspectives into a book. So I'd like to have Amnon show us the book cover. And Marsha, can you explain a little bit about the book?
sure. So the book is a memoir called From the Roots, and it's it's a story about a woman who has faced a lot of obstacles and overcome them by choosing her joy. That's the basic premise for it. And it does talk a lot about the patient side of things. And I think for yoga professionals, it's helpful to see that because we don't always know what to say or do with a certain person who comes to our class or comes privately to our clinic. And it's a really good opportunity to see what someone might be going through with all these uh, consecutive traumas and losses in chronic situations versus a one-time.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can appreciate that perspective. Next week we have Matthew Sanford on the show, who also has a book about his growth and development from tragedy within his family and his explore with yoga. And we have that as part of our reading. So I look forward to look at your book because perspective gaining is part of the eye-opening experience of being in the world if we're open to it, and it's great to have another resource for negotiating other people's as well as our own traumas and loss. So thank you for presenting that further. We've had our first pearl, which is in regards to being present with others and helping to foster a sense of community within the class. We're going to move to our next pearl from Marsha.
This is Pearl number 2. Connecting to yourself when teaching an amputee yoga class. Close your eyes and relax your spine. Let your shoulders drop down and take a deep breath in. Exhale. Envision that you have all the support you need in a universal hand, whether it's the divine, a beloved, somebody close to you, or just envisioning support, resting on the back of your heart. Take a deep breath in and allow yourself to surrender and relax into that supportive, imaginary hand. If it helps, you can sit against a chair and place a rolled up yoga mat or cylindrical bolster behind you so that you feel that support. And when you begin to teach your practice to amputees, this is what you want to be thinking about. You want to be relaxing into that support so your heart stays open.
I'm very big about hands. They're part of my history as a dentist and how I directly engaged other people. And as a yoga teacher and a pretty tactile and kinesthetic person, I live a lot through my hands. It's a major part. Also, I've come to experience other people who energetically can express a lot through their hands. So the idea and the experience of having that support can be energetically, emotionally, physically thrilling. Can you explain more about your perspective of hands, Marsha?
Sure. Well, it's certainly interesting coming from an amputee perspective, because I work with many people who don't have hands
Mm-hmm.
anymore, or born without them. For me, it's the connection to the heart. So everything extends from out of there, and I'm a big believer in the back of the heart, leading into the back of the heart to get the support to open from the front, which in my mind means that you're connecting first to the bigger picture before you do your own personal effort.
Mm-hmm.
And you do. So when an amputee doesn't have hands, that doesn't mean they don't have that extension. And so we teach ways of feeling that lift and openness.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense. And the fascinating thing is that now they're doing all these myoelectric hands. So there's energetic impulses, which is really fascinating when you think about what can be done and who knows how long with emotions and energies in terms of nerve and muscle impulses impacting that a hand can grasp, turn, cut, things like that, where all these basic skills that we have take for granted, we don't think about it, that energy is still there. So
Mm-hmm.
to be able to connect to it in a new way.
Yes. And even in the nuances of teaching, uh, I believe that it's important to have minimal bends in the wrists because the energy can get impeded, but it also causes kinking up the line. And I believe that changing the elbow position and softening the wrist allows a whole different energetic process as well as stability. And I have issues with poses that invite this and invite a lot of tension. Though we might need this positioning for stability, it's not necessarily comforting. It's more
Yeah.
constricting.
Mm.
How about the feet? What have you found relative to yourself and other lower limb amputees?
Well, the feet start in the belly to me. So there's that line of energy that goes down to the feet. So again, it's this idea that we move, and this is my dance background, we move from the center out. So, often in yoga we talk about pressing the feet into the ground, So if you really felt it out, you're really not pressing your feet into the ground. You're really using these internal muscles of the abdomen to reach down into your feet. So again, it's that connection to the umbilical cord, to the umbilical cord of the earth. So whether you have a foot or you don't have a foot, you can still find that connection by connecting to this core self, this whole area, lower belly.
So then would you say it's reasonable to have a connection between the navel and the tailbone or the coccyx, and that the navel is moving one way and the coccyx is moving another, and that provides some of the vectors for the downward? Is that too scientific?
Not at all. It's a movement therapy. It's a movement dance thing. So everything we do in all different kinds of dance trainings are about moving from this navel. So it all starts here. Yeah, and if you think about it, in the womb, you're moving from your navel. Everything is moving from the navel. So it's going back to that home base again, as teaching amputees and as an amputee to find that home base. And for me, my home base is here and here. So those two lines of energy are important to me. And I like to teach from that place, and I do. I teach my students from the center out.
Well, you brought up the idea and concept of dance and how we move from the core in dance. Can you describe your dance career and the adjustments that you've made? And
Sure. I think because I have this awareness of the center, it's given me the opportunity to do lots of different kinds of dance. It's still a struggle sometimes, there things come up, and I do have some wipeouts for sure. I'm used to them. Point in fact, I started flamenco again this past year, and the dance we're doing now is this skirt. You have to wear this skirt. It's called a bata de cola. I started on Saturday, and it's so long, the train, and it's so heavy. It's got to be pounds and pounds, and you have to lift it in certain ways to move across the floor. And all of the students in the class were in a bad mood by the end, because it was like yanking a heavy weight. But for me, I had to eventually go to the bar because I was losing my balance. But what I do is adapt, but I'm determined because I want to learn the dance and I love the skirt. So I'm willing to go through the pain of it a little bit. If the passion is there, it's not going to stop you. It's just not.
so it's almost as if you had a giant tail that you were swinging around there that had a fan on it.
Yes.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, it's huge. It's probably about 20 pounds of material that you whip around. So.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Good core strength.
So I'm hearing that you're learning, and then what has been some of the tips that you've come up with, though, in the sense of negotiating imbalance when trying to learn something new? Because you said you'd had a lot of spills, and there's different emotions that do come up with these struggles along the way. Can you share more about that?
Well, sure. So it does get scary sometimes, because if I do something, if I fall the wrong way, I could really damage my limb. So they do teach you how to fall when you learn how to walk. They teach you how to walk stairs, how to catch yourself. That's a big part of that. So when you learn how to walk again, I should say. And so I'll kind of scope around the room to see if there's support around the room, to make sure if I'm taking a dance class or a yoga class that I have an option. And that's what I recommend for amputees too, is walls are good. So if you're in a studio where all the walls are covered, it's usually not the case. It's good to get near a wall so that you, just in case you need it, it's there for you. Um, uh, it can be a little disheartening sometimes. Sometimes I get frustrated because I want to do more. And just the size of my residual limb is so tiny. Well, I'm very lucky to have my knee, which makes a big difference.
Mm-hmm.
But there are just certain things that I'm extremely careful about. And I'm doing this dance in heels. So I have a special prosthetic for heels for the flamenco shoes, so I've got to really balance there and then, add the dance part of it. So it's tricky. I don't think I could have done it without my dance background. Let's put it that way, because it's a really challenging form of dance. So,
Mm-hmm.
but
Well,
it's my favorite.
wow. Well, that's pretty fascinating. Just the idea of being on heels with one complete natural leg, let alone having two natural legs. So more power to you on that. Well, you were talking
There
about,
are a lot of us.
yes, please.
Sorry, go ahead. Well, there are many women, and I don't know, maybe some men too, where they do have prosthetic feet that go up into different heels. So it doesn't really matter because it's the socket that matters.
Right.
So if the socket and you have it, it's just, being able to balance. And if you wore heels before you lost your limb, it's kind of familiar. I didn't, obviously. So, but the moment I got my first heel leg, I knew that it was my destiny. So,
Well, I imagine that helps with your female identity and having a fullness too and a look, and I can appreciate the concept. We're going to take a little shift here towards our sponsor, and the sponsor this week is You Call This Yoga. We're having a delightful encore of Yoga Fest Raleigh this Saturday at a location called the Raleigh City Farm. Instead of flashing a poster, I'll just advise you that the City Farm is a wonderful outdoor venue in downtown Raleigh, supporting local agriculture and the community. Katie Breen is going to be teaching a donation-based class from 8 to 9, Saturday, July 15th, at the Raleigh City Farm. Speaking of farm and food, this is a great season for basil. If you like pesto, whether it's vegan or with cheese, then glue yourself to the seat because Amnon's going to queue up this week's fun and yum good health tip. Summertime is a great season to make pesto because basil can be growing in such abundance. I've gone to the backyard and picked 2 cups of purple and green basil for our recipe. We're going to take those 2 cups of basil. We're going to combine it with half a cup of pine nuts, 2 cloves of garlic that have been chopped and could be chopped more finely, but that's as far as I've gotten. I'm going to mix them in our food processor. Come on out. And then eventually add some other ingredients. We're going to pack the leaves in, and it may take more than one mixing to get this phase done. Let's try that and see. I've got the basil. I've got the garlic. And the pine nuts. Let's see what happens. Make sure you have the lid on tight or accurately. Good. Press chop. chop. All right. We've got the power. Gotta mix it in a little bit more. Make sure the blades don't get jammed up. Add a little bit more. Five seconds. It's taken a few minutes, but we have the leaves, garlic, and pine nuts ground down. And then I'm going to pour in through the holes in the top of the lid here, the olive oil to slowly engage that in. All right, now that that's done, we could add our brewer's yeast for vegans, or if you're non-vegan, we could add cheese. So we have 3 tablespoons, or roughly a quarter cup of brewer's yeast, half a cup of grated Parmesan cheese. Today we're doing the vegan. So let's just add that. We also have a tablespoon of lemon. I find that just quartering a lemon, taking 2 quarters, taking the seeds out, and just squeezing the lemon in. Then I don't have to bother with a spoon. Also, we can take a pinch of salt. I have some sea salt here. Just add a little bit of flavor there, like we don't have enough already. And then let's put the lid back on for the finale. Let's taste it and see. It's nice and pasty, yet very smooth. Can be used for pizzas, pastas, sandwiches. Manja. Ciao. Did you say ciao? No, not yet. We have to make the pasta. Amnon, I believe you might have tried some of that pesto. What was it like?
Boy, we're still enjoying it. And I'm sitting here slobbering.
Yes, he has a splash guard by his production station. Marsha, what do you think about pesto? Any unique experiences in your life?
I love pesto, but I eat a very, very simple diet, so it's usually, a grain and vegetables and a protein, tofu or whatever, and sometimes I'll just add it on the side or whatever. So I did buy these radishes at the farmer's market, and I had these leftover greens. I said, I want to throw them out. I wonder if I could make pesto with them. So I did, and it was very pungent, but it had a good bite to it for sure, because it's a lot of radish.
Right on.
But it was delicious. I used water instead of pine nuts because I thought that would sweeten it a little bit. So.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and also I misstated the yeast. We put the brewer's yeast on our popcorn, but this was nutritional yeast. Yes, but the funny thing in that video is usually my wife Barbara makes the pesto. She wasn't available, so I did it. So that's why I was so expert on the lid. And you don't see how really long it took me to get that lid on, especially due to editing. So it was interesting for that, where it's like, what's up with this? Or you didn't see the olive oil spilling over the side. But when you have one take, and that was, it turned out fine in the end. That's the point. We can have spills along the way, whether it's physical or liquidity, and that we could still come up delicious at the end. So, so speaking of turning out delicious, I hear that you have a online training program for teachers to learn from. Could you share some of that?
Sure. So I do two separate online trainings. One is just a basic 9-week foundational training where we cover, what is an amputation, what types of prosthetics do people have, how do I adapt the poses, what about veterans, trauma, PTSD, dealing with pain. That's a huge part of an amputee experience at the beginning, phantom pain. Um, Learning how to adapt yoga nidra and shavasana and all those things. And then I have a clinical training for people who work in hospitals and clinics directly with amputees, either right at bedside when they first lose their limb, all the way through the rehabilitation and recovery. So it's a process to do the same thing.
So therefore, does one have to be a healthcare professional for that second program?
You do. You need to be a physical therapist, an occupational therapist, prosthetist, yoga therapist who works in clinics and hospitals, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Interesting. So then would a yoga therapist have opportunity in either one of those programs?
Oh, yeah, I work with both, but these are specifically, the clinical training is specifically for people who have a job in a clinic with amputees. That's their
Gotcha.
job. Yeah.
So it's a deep, direct dive into that. Interesting. Wow. And what sort of team do you have when that happens, when you're doing this clinical training? Do you go off site?
I haven't gone off-site yet. I'd like to. It's still new. It's just the website's only a couple years old, and people are still hearing about me. But I did just write an article for Hanger. Hanger is a huge prosthetic company in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
So it's specific to all their clinicians on the practice of yoga and how it can benefit their patients. So, and I offered them a discount, group discount if they wanted to do a
Yes.
training, and people I want to reach, because their patients are not always people who have moved in their lives. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
Right. Right. There's a Hanger Prosthetics in Raleigh, and
Yeah.
so I saw some of their staff when they were patients of mine. So that's how I was familiar with that. Yes, it was a very good company. So viewers and listeners, we have a chance to connect with Marsha, 919-518-9773, Computers 2K Voice on Skype, and the chat box on the Nissan Communications Channel website. We've had a couple of pearls so far about the sense of engaging and finding out where people are when they are in the room. Also, that sense of feeling supported, the idea of the hand behind your heart, which is a wonderful feeling, essentially where your shoulder blades might draw together to elevate you. We're going to move towards Marsha's third pearl because we're so fortunate to have 4 today.
Pearl number 3. Paying attention to the movements of your amputee student. One of the quickest ways to learn how to work with an amputee is to really be present to how they're moving. So if someone is constantly rubbing their head, if they have hands, that would mean I'm going to guide them to get down, get rooted. If they're at their heart a lot, using their hands like this, or if they're fidgeting around, that gives me information about what to do next in their process. Be prepared to know your poses well, your pranayama well, so that you can provide RXs or antidotes for people. An example might be, if someone is going like this, just naturally, that's a pretty big clue that you want to work on their spinal alignment and help them to feel balance between both the left and right side of the body, and especially the pelvis, so that the neck feels more supported.
Marsha, would you elaborate a little further on that, Pearl?
Sure. Well, it works both with yoga and with energy work that I do. So I can tell where we need to be moving, I should say, be moving, where we need to be focusing, but based on where the people are pointing to. And so, for example, if they keep pointing to their belly, I might do some abdominal work. I might do some lower belly breathing, triangle, warrior 1 and 2, chair pose, things to boat to tone in the core, because this part of the body unconsciously is saying, please pick me, pick me. So it makes it easier for me, I think, to discover where they're at, and also if they have repetitive movements, even how they move their head, how they move their eyes. If I see people with this kind of look, then I know they're a little skeptical of yoga, or something. They're watching to see what I'm going to do, or something like that. I go, okay, I have to find a way to make this a little more fun for them. So just there's clues in bodies and faces on how to yeah.
So it's a key element, just engaging with people in general, is to be looking and not just absorbed in
Yep.
the picture we're painting or anticipating. And that's valid,
Yep.
even, I believe, with not necessarily only to limb loss, because when I was viewing your Pearl after you had sent it to me, I was picturing how fidgety I am and my quest for alignment due to my spinal issues. Often trying to support myself to be in a more ideal skeletal relationship because of my scoliosis. So I'm quite a loud broadcaster of my issues, or at least some of them. I'm sure some I suppress pretty well too. So it's sort of looking for the obvious, which is only a start. What resistance or challenges might you sense in people if you try to address these issues? Let's say if you feel that someone's broadcasting yet they don't want to go there.
Then I don't.
Okay.
I just don't. Because that's more about what's more important right now, for the person to feel comfortable and safe, or for me to help them.
Uh-huh.
If that makes sense. Yeah. So I'll do something generic or simple, and then I might give them homework. And then I call it a little provocative to get them thinking, if they so choose, and I just sort of leave it very open-ended. And often it's just that they don't want to explore those things in the presence of another person. They want to just kind of take it in. It's amazing to me how, and I don't know if this happens for you too, Howie, but I've had people walk through my door and just start crying immediately, and we haven't even begun. So all that says to me is they haven't been seen, they haven't been heard. Nobody's held space for them, just being here. So sometimes that's enough, and sometimes that's too much. And I have had some clients who have stopped working with me because it was too much, and we barely did anything, just a couple pranayams, and yeah. So.
Which is an interesting experience, because if they're exiting the relationship when you was ready to be with them, it could create your own emotions about success or presence, and gee, did I foster something that was was going in the worse rather than better direction, or however we measure that.
Yeah, I don't, I don't necessarily feel that, to be perfectly honest, because they're very clear to me that they're looking for help with this, this, and this, and so we address this, this, and this. But if we get to this and the next this is just too much, then I know it's just too much right now.
Okay.
And they may come back. People come back as well. So I don't see it as a failure, and I don't see it as, because I'm very clear about boundaries and spiritual contract that I have with all my students, so that they know exactly where we're at when we get there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I was speaking of the general human tendency that if something doesn't go as we were thinking it may, here another not getting too attached to the result.
Yep.
So I can appreciate that
Yeah.
too. Viewers and listeners, we're going to move towards Marsha's fourth bonus pearl because it's just delightful. Thank you, Amnon.
And this is pearl number 4. Leela, divine play. This is an activity you can do to break down barriers a little bit, to help your group connect, and to lighten the load, because losing a limb or limbs is heavy duty. But a lot of amputees really, really, really just want to get back to their lives and their possibility. So the easiest way to do that is to break people up into groups of 2 or 3 and do some group yoga poses or partner poses. You want to think this through pretty carefully, obviously, because everybody's going to be in a different position with prosthetics and non-prosthetics and what they're capable of. So you want to scan the room and see who you might match with other people. But it's probably easier if you just work with the people that are sitting next to each other, because for some amputees, getting up and down is challenging. That requires you, again, to be in that state of curiosity and surrender. And how can I make this work? A really good one is eye-to-eye gazing and breathing with your partner, back-to-back breathing, twisting from left to right and saying hello to your partner behind you. Really easy and simple.
That seems so basic of human contact and yet can seem so remote.
Mm-hmm.
Starting with...
I don't do that.
Say that again?
I don't do that.
Okay. It's not the first day. But that's why we had it as a fourth pearl instead of right after pearl 1. Hi, how you doing? Hey, back to back, stare in my eye. But it is an evolution of trust, and it is intimacy and fear and many other emotions that could come up when you're that close to another person, I suspect. What do you see?
Well, I do see those things, and I also see a lot of laughter and some body humor that wouldn't necessarily be appropriate in other yoga classes, let's put it that way.
Okay.
Some people will joke about their limbs or prosthetics, and for other people it's a little awkward, but you have to be with your group for a while before you can do something like that. But when I talk about those boundaries, again, when you're doing yoga, with just like we talked about before, you can get to that one layer and then you're kind of like, oh, I don't know if I want to go any, it's too much to go deeper. And so you may be right at that juncture, and then you're in the group class. And so a little partner activity may kind of bring us all back together again, and then you may be able to make your way through to that space, the next deeper place. eye-to-eye gazing, um, I probably would do that only with a very, very dear, close group of amputees who have been together for a long time. And I might do something silly like funny faces or something, just eye-to-eye gazing and then go to funny faces and then back to eye-to-eye gazing and something like that.
Well, just the idea of divine play and being joyful and non-judgmental are a wonderful youthful experience that often can get shunted over time from personality changes, hormone changes, life changes, and losses. It's hard to really retain and expand joy over time. There's other physiological experiences that happen. So this is a wonderful process that doesn't necessarily have to be limited to amputees. I mean, any individual can benefit from human contact if it's compassionate. I suspect that playing and accepting that things are going to fall apart are great lessons, even if you're four-limbed, if that's what we're calling this.
Yep. I call non-amputees, non-prosthetic wearers.
Ah, well, it's interesting.
Prosthetic,
But it's interesting you say that because I have several prostheses, but I do have my limbs. So so I have my hardware. It just is more internal. Uh, Even having a prosthetic teeth are an interesting adjustment, especially being a dentist. So
Yeah.
I've had to adjust to my own system's collapse over time, even though I think I'm giving it a high quality of attention. But that's what happens. So that's part of my lesson too, as a healthcare professional, is, well, what are my flaws? Well, at least the ones I notice, and then how am I negotiating it? So I can appreciate that. Would you share a little bit, once again, for our viewers and listeners about your online courses in case they didn't catch it before?
So we have the Yoga for Amputees 9-week foundations course, which covers the basics of, how to teach an amputee asana, pranayama, relaxation, all the physical parts, but then also the emotional trauma, the pain management piece. I forgot to mention last time also we have a piece now on veterans exclusively, 1 week on veterans, which is a big piece of limb loss for many of my students, and then the clinical training, which is 6 weeks, I believe. I have to check the online, and that's specifically for people working with amputees in hospitals and clinics.
Wonderful. And Amnon, would you show Marsha's book one more time for folks? And Marsha, would you describe your From the Roots book a little?
Sure. So From the Roots has been in the process for quite a long time, 54 years. So it's about choosing joy in the midst of, I would say, somewhat insurmountable obstacles along the way, and mine have been physical, and consequently the physical ones have caused emotional obstacles. To embrace, some of them I embrace, some of them I overcome, and the process of being a human being, a fully evolved human being on the earth now after all of that, and where am I going, and I hope it resonates with people who have experienced any kind of significant change or loss, and honor the journey.
Mm-hmm.
You can get it on Amazon.
Wonderful. Personally speaking, I still deal with fear of loss of mobility, having had a broken leg, hip arthritis, mobility issues, post-cervical surgeries in my neck, from my spinal cord compression, and it triggers all sorts of downward spiraling in terms of being depressed in some form, and then fearful and reactive in another form, and it does linger. So loss, even if it's not overt and it's not prolonged, can still evoke many emotions. So invite our viewers and listeners to reach out to Marsha. Marsha's email is marsha@yogaforamputees.com, the website yogaforamputees.com, as the Facebook page, where you'll find her events and inspiration. Also for You Call This Yoga, we have Saturday coming up, Yoga with Katie Breen at the Raleigh City Farm, 8 to 9 a.m., donation class to support our programs in Southeast Raleigh. And next week we have Matthew Sanford sharing his perspectives on dealing with loss and making the most of that and his mission in the world. It's been a joy having Marsha on the show. Viewers and listeners, we hope you'll rate the show. It's an option on the Nissan Communications channel. Thank you, Marsha. Any further thoughts and comments that you might share with our audience?
Well, the one thing I would say to remember if you have an amputee in your class is to look at your amputee student as a whole and work from the strengths and abilities that they do have, see those first, and then work from the challenges.
Beautiful. Thank you. We all must remember we're part of the whole. Viewers and listeners, we look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you, Amnon. Namaste.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Telestream's Wirecast software, StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.